about, have you heard about Viktor Frankl? He's a guy that was in the concentration camps, and obviously I don't know a lot about him, but he, maybe I've mentioned him before in the talks. But he survived and became quite famous afterwards, writing books and being one of the famous psychologists after that. And he has a very famous quote, which is very much to do with what I want to tell you today. He says the following: a man can stand almost any terrible situation, including torture, if he can see in it some kind of meaning and extract from it the feeling that it is structurally related to some larger pattern of growth, perhaps as a test. But men will break down and collapse if even much less strenuous events can only be seen as totally meaningless. So basically, trying to say that if we know why things are happening and what's the logic behind it, what's the cause behind it, it kind of makes it easier to deal with it, because we see the pattern and we see why we have to go through this. Almost like you're having your, imagine you're the parent of a teenager, and you know that the teenager is going to eventually go through puberty and all the crisis of puberty, even though they were a sweet little child just a couple of years back. But you know what's the schedule of development of a normal person, normal human being, and you know what to expect at that age, that it's not going to be totally peaceful, that things are going to change and they're going to start showing in a completely different way than before. And it is something similar what's going on at the moment in the world. We are living in a very, very interesting times, and astrology is following that and explaining that to a great extent. I'm going to try to tell you how and what's that's connected with. But the times are really quite unusual, because to follow the trends of history and crisis in society, we're looking at a few planets and their movements. And every now and then, they make certain aspects to each other, which means the angle to which they stand in the sky to each other, as they are all going around the sun. But as the planets are going around the sun, they all have their own speeds and their own schedule. But every now and then, they fall into positions which make them interact. They kind of push each other's buttons. And everything is cyclic. So we're talking about cycles of time and cycles of history. Some of these are showing us at what stage we are at the moment, and why the situation is getting more complicated exactly right now, and why not 2 years ago or 5 years ago, even though at any moment there is something, some dynamic that is being activated. And well, we have to, I think that we are part of something bigger, because that's ultimately how things are. However, whatever state of mind you keep yourself in, and if you want to isolate or not, it's not possible to totally isolate. And I learned this today. I was reminded about this today when I went to the shop, that I mean, even if I spend the whole day reading philosophical literature and keeping positive and thinking that I know what is going on, and there is no point panicking or being worried, because it is a stage of something. It is part of a process, and there is a reason why it's happening. You want it or not, you get infected, I think, by the whole atmosphere around you. And we just can't ignore it. I think maybe very soon I would have to do some more extreme things and have to step in out of my introverted usual character and go out and maybe help someone with something. I don't know. It's very possible, I think, that this is going to happen. But yes, as I said before, astrologers predicted not exactly what's going to happen in 2020, but we knew that something is going to happen, and it's going to be big, because this year there is a very big congregation of planets in the same place, and they're not just any planets. They're the ones that usually we're mostly scared of and mostly watchful when we see that something is going on in their positions. And it's historic because I don't think that in the next, from a certain perspective, in the next 30 years, we're not going to have anything like this, any such serious crisis. And then from another perspective, it's going to be maybe a couple of centuries at least until people go through something so significant, so game-changing as it is at the moment. Now, when we look at the planets and their cycles back in time, some people do that, and I can recommend, if you wish later, where to read about this and check what was going on back in history, which planets were doing what and what happened at that time. But if we do this, we're going to see patterns. We're going to see that not exactly the same events are happening, but something similar. Something similar to, let's say, the last time Pluto was in Capricorn. At the moment, Pluto, that last planet, most feared planet, was at some point in the past in the same sign when it is now. And when we go back and check what happened at that time, we can make a connection to nowadays. And the connection is pretty obvious. And this holds true for all of the big planets. The big planets, the ones that are very slow, and because they're moving so slowly, when they either travel through a section of your birth chart, which is very active, there are many things going on there. Let's say you have many planets there or something important. Or when the actual planets stand to each other in a particular way, as it is now, we expect that something is going to appear. And it's going to be one of those cycles in history where we need to go through some sort of rite of passage. We have to go through a crisis so that something new begins. And I know it sounds a bit more philosophical, but that's really what's at the bottom of this, I think. That's why we are going through this crisis at the moment, and we never know how really this is going to unfold. But looking at the transits to the end of this year, and I'll run you through them. It's not that technical, I'm sure you understand it, and it's in the handout as well. How and what is acting right now. You see that it's so loaded. It's extremely loaded, like it wasn't for a very long time and won't be for a very long time. So yeah, 2020 is going to be a year which we'll come back to. And maybe, I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, but I was imagining all sorts of things, including wars, including political crisis, and it may come so far as this, who knows. But what is happening with this virus is ticking all the boxes of what the symbols, the astrological symbols, are kind of expressing. For example, Pluto as a planet, Saturn as a planet, the sign in which they are, which is Capricorn, and all the other planets which are joining in at the moment and activating the dynamic. So changes in the air, and the change is inevitable. Unfortunately, it's inevitable. However we want to react to it, there will be no escape, because when certain cycles come to a point, as now, which is like a ripening point, everything is interconnected. All the people in the world this time are going to be interconnected. There will not be such a way to isolate certain countries completely, or isolate certain territories, because it's very global this time around, and the symbols of the planets that are involved are showing that and confirming that this is going to be very global. So it is some sort of a new era that's beginning. The big astrological topic of 2020 is the conjunction of the planets Pluto and Saturn. So conjunction means they are in the same place. They are, when we look at the sky, if we are having, let's say, we are observing with a telescope, or just imagine view and looking at the sky, we would see these two planets this year in the same place, which is an event. This is not how things are all the time. You know, they're all moving, they're all changing their positions all the time, but in different speeds. And Pluto and Saturn are two, if not the two, most feared planets and most the ones that have the most negative reputation out there. This is not completely justified. They are both planets of change and crisis, and they bring it over when they have major cycles coming to turning points, as it is now. But we have to be very short-sighted and very hedonistic or something like that if we ignore the good benefits of what they're bringing, because they really are bringing something good at the end of the day. But the process of getting there is very painful. It has always been like this in history. If we track things back in time, we will see that the crucial dates when these two planets were together again in the past are very recognizable years. So Saturn and Pluto. Pluto is very slow, extremely slow planet. They all go around the zodiac, and as they go around the sun, they basically travel through the wheel of the zodiac, through the circle. And Pluto is the slowest one. It's the reason why it is connected to the biggest changes in history and the biggest cyclic crisis that society is not just individual places in the world, or it's really very global when we talk about Pluto. It's the big game changer because it travels around the sun and the zodiac in almost 250 years. That's a very long time. So this means that during a human lifetime, Pluto is not covering very much space. It is covering maybe just 1/3 maximum of your birth chart. And it takes a long time to travel from one sign of the zodiac to the next. So it is an event. It is not something to be ignored, looking into where it is at the moment. And usually it works like this. Wherever Pluto is, in whatever sign, this is where we look at the topics related to that sign psychologically and generally. And this is what kind of changes we can expect in the very big picture, in the global development or evolution of mankind, not just small processes here and there, but the big picture. So Pluto is, I will tell you more about it. I'll concentrate on the keys about it after a little while. But then just mentioning at the moment, so we have a general picture. The other one, Saturn, with which it's now together, is much faster than it. If it takes Pluto 250 years to go around one circle, it takes Saturn only 30 years. So that's a big difference. And imagine them going around in a circle, one much faster than the other, and every about 34, 35 years, they come together, like now. So that means that the last time we had a Pluto-Saturn conjunction, as we call it in astrology, was about 30 years ago, and just over 30 years ago. I've got the dates for you on the handout, but just looking into the last 3 times to illustrate this. So the last time was between 1988 and 1991. So I don't know where you were, whether you were born at that time. Even if you weren't born at that time, you remember what your parents were telling you about this time. It was one of the most crucial turning points, especially politically. The fall of the Soviet Union, of the Berlin Wall, the globalization, the start of the globalization of society. And something very important happened around that time, which is shaping everything that we're now living through, is the start of the World Wide Web as well. I think it was 1992 when they had the first website on. And you can, if you think back, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, when Saturn and Pluto were together again, then we see that it's around that time when something was turning a page and the world was not the same again after these years. If there was a certain course of I don't know, course of life, course of action before that, all the historical events and political especially events, because both of these two planets are quite political, they they are about society. They're not just about our personal lives. They affect our personal lives because of what's happening outside in the world. The one before the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s was 1959, 1962. That's when they were together again. And this is the start of the Cold War. And this is when, in many places in the world where there were colonies, especially in Africa, these individual countries started gaining their independence. But these are just examples I've picked up. You can find, if you go deeper into this, you'll find a lot more going on and a lot more happening in this period that's similar to what happened in the 80s and 90s and similar to what's going on today, even though we're talking about some completely different events. It's almost like there is a structural pattern of development. Ages, like the cycle of the moon. It's very easy to explain this when we think of the different phases of the moon and how nothing is really stable for a long time, with the phases changing and with the moods changing with the phases. We see how within just 1 month we have like a mini mode doing over the course of many years. So we are somewhere in this cycle at the moment, the cycle of Saturn and Pluto. This is called the cycle of relationship, where we have two planets and they are in some sort of relationship to each other. They're either just meeting now, as it is now, they're starting a new cycle. And for the next 30 something years, they're going to go through different phases of relationship with each other, very similar to what's going on during a month between the sun and the moon, the lunar month. And there will be a beginning, a middle, and an end of that cycle. Something very characteristic happens now because we're just starting it. There is a turning of the wheel, which is basically opening a new road. And then after about 15 years, we're going to have a lot more clarity about what's going on now. And we would understand these processes that we are suffering or enjoying in different ways. But, whatever is starting now will not be very clear until the middle of the cycle, which is about 15, 16 years from now. It is very easy for this reason now to be so confused and so lost. It's interesting that today we are at the very last day of Pisces. Last day of Pisces today and beginning of Aries. 0 Aries is the beginning of the natural zodiac, the beginning of the starting point in astrology for everything, for every cycle. So we are meeting today in this transition day where, it's like a new year, like Happy New Year, we can say today. Happy New Zodiac year or astrological year. I don't know if it came in Valencia already. I haven't looked at the chart yet, but I think it's just turning now, and tomorrow morning we will be in Aries already. And it is very similar to Saturn and Pluto now. So Saturn and Pluto are doing something similar. They're starting day one. Actually, the conjunction already happened. The exact conjunction happened on the 12th of January this year. So this mud year had started like that since the beginning. The fires in Australia were like the first drop, and all the other global stuff that are kind of accumulating and getting more intense. During this year, at the moment as we speak, we are in one of the most intense periods of it. It's expected to calm down a little bit in the next months, but then there is another peak in September, October, which I'll explain to you why exactly I'm telling you this, and why I think we shouldn't rest assured that this is going to be a minor thing that's going to go. Even I thought this coronavirus news in the beginning was annoying to me. It was like, why am I being inundated with this negativity and with this, which sounded also very artificial and still sounds very artificial. But then I realized that these transits are so serious that it is impossible that something won't be triggered. And the moment I realized that this virus is the perfect storm, it ticks really all the boxes of what needs to turn around and what we're expecting to turn around. And I want to start talking about Saturn, so you can see why we expected this. Saturn is the first player in the picture that is acting now. Saturn is traveling for 30 years around the zodiac. So it is quite similar to just what I said, the moments when it meets Pluto, about 34 years. But if we just take Saturn on its own, forget about Pluto for the moment, and just see Saturn. Saturn is the so-called society planet, but not the only one. There is another one, Jupiter. But for the moment, let's just concentrate on Saturn. Saturn was the last planet of the solar system and of astrology. It was like the final one, the most distant one, until quite recently. I've told you this before, but it's been just under 3 centuries since we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And before, we didn't know about those planets. We didn't know about the processes that they were symbolizing and the psychological functions they were standing for. Even now, we don't really know them well enough, because they're a little bit superhuman. They're not very material. They are different from all the rest of them. So before we had these 3 last planets, one of which is Pluto, Saturn was the ultimate end of the universe, of the solar system. And that's why ancients, and even today, were following it when they wanted to understand what is going to change in society, when is it going to change next, especially politically. And all the topics of power and control and organization of society and things like that, they were connected with Saturn and the cycles of Saturn. Every 30 years, when it came back to the place where it started, whatever started in that first moment suffers a big change in life, a big crisis. You know about the Saturn return. Most of you have been through their own Saturn return and so on. So Saturn is not an easy one to deal with. It's painful. It's really painful, but it's also very helpful. Saturn is the law of cause and effect. Some may say the law of karma as well. But karma is too metaphysical for my taste, I think. Let's say the law of cause and effect. This is our accountability function. The moving Saturn is asking, when it comes to a place like now, is asking us to learn about responsibility, about mobilization, how to mobilize ourselves and how to be self-sufficient and very disciplined. It is the planet of social institutions that somehow create a frame from which we cannot escape. It's like a control system. Saturn is the symbol of the control system. It's the symbol of the state and all the institutions of the state that are basically putting us, even now, you see how we have to comply with the law. Law and order are under the rule of Saturn as well. And whatever is kind of given from the top, the individual has to somehow limit itself within the limits, within the boundaries. Saturn is the planet of boundaries, the planet of all constrained structures, like, for example, the skeleton of the body. That's another thing that it's related to. So Saturn wants from us to learn how to have prolonged effort, how to work really hard for something that we want. And it's this ability to stay calm and stay practical and unshattered, even when the situation is getting really difficult and really painful. It's a pressure planet. And the kind of pressure that Saturn is putting on us is a physical kind of pressure. It's not that much it does become psychological ultimately if we don't manage it well and if we succumb to it. But initially, Saturn just wants from us to learn how to act decisively in the outside world when we need to act. So there is a situation or there is a crisis as now. If your Saturn in your birth chart is strong and you have developed it well, then you would be more likely to be able to play with what's happening in a good, reasonable way. Saturn is the planet of reason and logic as well. The ability to calm your mind and cool your mind when emotions are overflowing because something insecure is going on around you. Uh, Saturn is a material planet because it's an Earth planet. You know, it's connected to the sign Capricorn. So Capricorn is one of the Earth signs, the third Earth sign, as a matter of fact. Just very quickly, you know already, most of you, that there is earth, air, water, and fire, and how fire and air are those more optimistic and exuberant energies that are being able to fight out in an extroverted way and do things in an extroverted way, have high spirits and so on, just very basically. While the introverted ones, uh, water and earth, are a lot more prone to depression and a lot more prone to looking inwards and dealing with their own demons, inside demons. More happens on the inside with them than on the outside. So Capricorn belongs to this group, and Saturn therefore belongs to this group as well, because here we're dealing with our fear of insecurity, and that's material insecurity, as Earth is interested in resources, in do we have food on the table? Do we have enough money to pay the bills? These are the questions that Saturn is connected to. If we have a Saturn crisis, if someone tells me, oh, I have a Saturn crisis, I might ask, so did you lose your job, for example? Or did you, are you without any money or something like that? Did something happen to your property? Because Saturn is about those tangibles that we have to have in order to keep the wheel turning and just be functional in everyday life. And there is, because it's a societal planet, it's about being able to offer something society, and society gives you back your means of life, your means of survival. So when this is shattered, when the Saturn rule and organization is changed, we lose that stability, and we are completely panicking about the basics. So that stands behind the reason why Capricorn is one of the most depressive and melancholic signs, and the most at the same time ambitious and wanting, not so much because of some sort of greed, but in order to have control over the resources. And sometimes people become its resources, which is where the abuse of power and abuse of authority and corruption and things like that are also related to Capricorn and Saturn. Like the Saturn is like the big company, the big state. We want it or not, we're all interdependent. And it's such an illusion that we cannot, that we can separate from this. Saturn is teaching a very hard lesson when it makes a transit. And always something happens that reminds you that you need others and you need to be contributing something every day, because the moment you stop, you're lost. So Saturn is a pressure for productivity. We want to be productive all the time. We want to be working all the time. And yeah, at the moment, Saturn is in Capricorn. So that's one of the main keys of the situation. That Saturn is at home. It is located in the sign which it rules. So we have something like a double Saturn effect, a double repression feeling. And like it is in the birth chart, you have, that the energies and the planets, the positions of the planets in zodiac signs in all sorts of different ways in the birth chart, which is meant to give us some idea about how you feel about your life and your world and how you approach your life. very, very individually, is just a pattern that is prescribed, and it's like a software installed in our head. So whatever you have in your birth chart is just a lens, and it's not really how things are, basically. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that whatever position of something in astrology we have that is affecting us, it is more about what we think about it or what we feel about it than what really is going on outside in the world. So maybe nothing much is going on outside of the world. I would speculate maybe there isn't even such a serious health issue right now. Maybe we are lied about this. Who knows? It's just a speculation. Or maybe not. Maybe we are lied the other way around, that it's actually a lot more serious than it is. But you see how what's going on now is all about authorities, we having to rely on the authorities or to listen to them, and to question whether we believe them or not, or to question our own personal fears and insecurities and things like that, which is all to do with Saturn. Saturn is also one of the main things in astrology that are like keywords for Saturn, is the father archetype, or to be more specific, the elder archetype. So in this virus thing going on now, we are hearing that the most affected people will be the elderly. And that's one of the places where I see this double Capricorn signature or double Saturn signature. The elders of society. What is our relationship to them? Why are we not giving them the role of maybe somebody that we can learn something from, or we can, I don't know, be in the role of the wise old man or something like that. But what we see now is that it seems like there is something going on which deliberately wants to harm them or to get rid of them. It sounds a bit too strongly said. I don't know what you guys think about this, but uh, even if this is natural, even if this virus is natural, then that means that there is a real event corresponding to the astrological signature of Capricorn and Saturn. And it's the archetype of old age as well, very much, and time in general, the sense of time, the sense of aging. Uh, Through our Saturn in the chart, we feel that. You know how after your first Saturn return for the first time, you start thinking about age and adjusting yourself to the fact that we are growing older, not the other way around. And Saturn is the timekeeper of both these relatively short-term historical events and our personal life schedule as well, the schedule of growing older and growing more mature. If you have a lot of Capricorn in your chart, if Capricorn is very represented, say you have the moon in Capricorn or the sun in Capricorn, or the nodes are involved, whatever, it could be many different things, but if you look at your charts, you can see, then you are more likely to take part in what's going on now and to be more affected by it than if Capricorn is relatively untouched in your chart. We all have it there somewhere. So those planets, Saturn and Pluto, that are together in Capricorn now, they are somewhere in our chart. They're in some house, for example. And the houses are showing us where, in which area of our life, this energy is going to express itself. Is it going to be in the family or in relationships or in work? And what sort of effect this situation is going to have on you, the personal effect? The answer to that is in the birth chart. It's not in the global picture that much. But just to say that some of us will be more affected by it than others. Now, a few other things I want to tell you about Saturn and Capricorn. So I'm combining them here because Saturn and Capricorn are synonyms. And the last time Saturn was in Capricorn, as I said, was that end of 80s, beginning of 90s. We had other planets there together with it. Maybe you know that there was Uranus in Capricorn then at the same time as well. There was Neptune in Capricorn. So in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, just about 30 years ago, we had a similar situation to today, but the other planets that were joining forces with Saturn, they were very powerful also. They were also game changers, but there is no such game changer as Pluto. Pluto, when Pluto comes in the personal chart or in the world picture by transit, it really wipes out everything that we are familiar with, the basics, the core of the whole, structure of how things were until this moment, and it is forcing a change, a more like a life and death situation when Pluto gets involved. So that makes today's problem expectedly more bigger of a problem than the one in the 90s, in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, because of this involvement of Pluto. So going back to Saturn very quickly, how we can use Saturn in this situation for the good. Because I said so many negative things about Saturn, I was like scaremongery. That's not the point. Actually, I believe these transits are meant to teach us that we just simply need to realize that we are living through a phase of something, and we have come to that phase, and this phase is going to pass. It's not going to be like this forever. Things are eventually going to improve, and they're going to improve tremendously, but this is meant to be a turning point, and when we have that, it's always difficult, it's always painful. But some ways we can use Saturn energy for our good and to basically utilize what's in the air. Almost like we are being, I don't know, sprayed with or injected with something now. And this is called Saturn on the one hand. What can we do with this? So it doesn't kill us, but it actually helps us. Whatever projects you may have thought of starting, and projects that require a long time of working on them. For example, building a website or creating a product, something that now can be done from home, presumably, let's say, or somehow can be done. It's possible to plan for it. But maybe study a language, maybe anything that requires prolonged effort and perseverance and diligence and things like that. This is the core of Saturn. And Saturn, when you have it strong in your chart or when it is in the air, like now, makes us very productive and very successful if we use it. It's actually so great of an energy of self-sufficiency and resilience that if you tune into it and you say, okay, well, I can put things aside for a certain short period of time, maybe make a plan for the next 2-3 months or something like this, and set up real goals. So say in 2 weeks or in a month, I want to be from here to wherever. It is very likely, I'm trying to say, that it's going to work now. And it's going to be possible to work on something behind the scenes that later on will be an asset, will be something that you can earn you money or can bring you in a different position or whatever. Saturn can be extremely fruitful when we don't hide from it and we don't want to, when we're not lazy, basically. Saturn is the opposite to lazy. It likes hard work and it likes discipline. And if you invest in that temporarily, I think it's going to have a very big payoff later on. And it's a way to turn things around. It's a way to also just, I mean, it sounds a bit like telling somebody that's, let's say, it's overweight, just stop eating, which is not helpful. It's always an advice. But we have to revise bad habits and basically stop doing things that are not productive for us, not working for us. And if we try to do this now, Saturn is going to help. It's not going to be the bad guy that's delaying things and locking us down. And basically, it's funny that the word lockdown is so often used for Saturn. Like Saturn locked me down and I couldn't move my whatever task forward. It's this like illusion of time being slowed down and nothing really happening. And the insecurity of this moment is so fearful. I mean, I know, not fearful, but we're afraid of it, that we may just like stop doing anything. I don't know if you feel like this. About a week ago, I was at the verge of giving up emotionally and psychologically and everything, just because I lacked the energy, and I felt like not doing anything at all. I just couldn't see a reason. As one of the effects of Saturn is to make you uh, to lose hope or to lose perspective, as it's not easy to see the end result, and it seems like it's going to be so hard to get there. So the trick here is not to give up whatever we're doing, just not to give it up, because otherwise it's just going to create even more and more pressure, where the outside world will start asking things from you and you won't be able to respond. So I'm repeating myself now, but just some sort of proactiveness is what Saturn needs. uh, it is supposed to be that energy that's building character. That's what they call it. Like if we go through a difficult Saturn time, we are much stronger. It's the idea of what doesn't kill me is making me stronger, kind of thing. So I think you get the picture with Saturn and with Capricorn. The thing is that when it's peaceful and we don't have the crisis that we have at the moment, in normal times, let's say, the Capricorn archetype is leading to excessive power games, especially political games. So that's another thing that's very important to know about Saturn, I think, and Capricorn, is that this is the area of politics and society organization, where resources are being distributed, where somebody or a group of people that nobody knows and nobody sees decides the fate of everybody else when it comes to food, water, medicine, the whole structure of the system. It's like a skeleton that's, I mean, at the moment, they say with this transit of Saturn in Capricorn, these things are meant to fall. These things are meant to be changed, to be somehow, how can I say, to not work anymore. And that's why everybody expected a political change. That, say, something's going to happen with Donald Trump in America. We don't know. Maybe it will, because as far as I know, it's still coming. This major election thing. But nobody imagined it's going to be so quick and so universal kind of thing, because look what happens. The whole financial system is collapsing, and Capricorn and Saturn is the banks, the insurance companies, the big corporations for which many people live, and they basically turn the wheel of finances and so on. So all those things are being affected right now, very, very fittingly, with the symbols of Capricorn and Saturn. And Saturn is changing things in whatever sign it is going through. Before it was in Sagittarius, before it was in Capricorn. That was from 2015, end of 15 to 16 and beginning of 17. So these years, Saturn was in the previous sign, in Sagittarius. And it's not at home there. It's not its typical energy. But still things in the world were happening politically and socially that were not comfortable, and they were related to Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is about movement of people. Remember the migration crisis. It's about globalization, about mixing of people from different races, from different cultures, just some of the things. Just to tell you how the agenda shifts depending on what we're talking about. As Saturn moved into Capricorn, now what we're expecting to change is more to do with the system and the politics and the financial institutions. And everybody will ultimately be affected in one way or another, even if you have, enough property. Uh, Saturn times, and especially Saturn in Capricorn, what they turn around is the material situation. So somebody who was very rich until yesterday may lose it all now, and other people that didn't have anything may become rich overnight. And this is definitely going to happen now in this period. We've come to a stage when the system is turning around. And also, I don't know if you've heard about these problems with the royal family, for example. I don't know if you follow this. This is more the UK kind of thing, but it's just very exemplary of how people generally stop believing in those old traditional institutions. Capricorn and Saturn are the most conservative energy, the one that votes for the known, for the old, for the well-developed thing that everybody is used to. It's not very tolerant to change or to progress or the future. It tries to preserve, it tries to keep what we are familiar with, especially those traditional institutions. And now the royal family is going through very, very difficult time. Some are saying they'll probably be abolished because of all the scandals. I don't want to go into this too much. If you want to research it, if you're not familiar, but it's pretty big because it's one of the biggest institutions in the world, still surviving, which is, I think it's obsolete, but we can argue about this. I'm not too, I don't have a very, very strong opinion, but if it is obsolete, it's going to go. And that's what these transits are telling us, that whatever doesn't work in these topics, the Saturn topics, it's going to be abolished with force. And many people that are completely just not part of the game, they would become hurt because of this and in the process of this. But that abuse of power, which is being revealed, is very typical Capricornian thing as well. Capricorn is the very, imagine the top of the chart, the career place, the MC. That's what we also connect with Capricorn and Saturn, where we are out there and we want to be somebody important, somebody listen to. It's a very visible position as well. So that's why we're looking into famous people. The other scandals are in Hollywood at the moment, which is another big institution that everybody was taking for granted for many, many years. And now it's all falling down. It's all completely being questioned and changed. And it's just the old order is no longer going to be the way it was. So how is this going to be happening overnight? We need something to trigger it. We need an excuse. We need some sort of crisis to help the changes to happen. So the changes were scheduled. Nobody had an idea how they're going to happen and how they're going to be implemented. But it's like a movie which I know roughly the plot of, but I have no idea who is going to play in the movie, how many characters, how exactly the whole thing is going to unfold. But I know that at the end, certain thing is going to be changed. So now I see this coronavirus thing as the perfect excuse, or one of the things. Probably it will be the biggest thing that will put the process into motion, and will just, under the pretext of dealing with this, maybe part of it will be dealing with this, but there will be another part which will be about other things will change just in the background because of that. Would you like to stop me and to say something? Because I just keep going on, and I don't know. What do you guys think about this Capricornian atmosphere at the moment? Amanda? No? I don't know who's trying to connect. You still hear me?
Oh, hey.
Yes, yes. So do you have any questions or comments so far?
My question, I guess, would be like for people who Saturn is entering Aquarius, is triggering their Saturn return. I know mine is a late degree, 25-degree Aquarius, so it's going to be later on towards 22, I think. But yeah, I know it's like it's the discipline, it's the structure, it's all of those things resonate with me, and my inner child is kind of just like, I don't want to do it. But I guess, yeah, my question would be, what does that mean for someone who this is actually their Saturn?
Yeah, Amanda, your microphone is not very strong, but I think I did hear your question. It's just, I know you're asking about, you're one of those born in the end of the 80s, and many of us are, and many of you would have in your charts this big group of planets in Capricorn, one of which is Saturn. So if you had your Saturn return recently, or you're just having it, you may be this group. And this means that the current transits are pushing a button in your own personal chart. You just need to look at the chart itself. We won't be able to do it now, but you look at the house in which your natal Saturn is, and then you look at if your natal Saturn, the one in the chart, is nothing to do with Capricorn. It was not in the end of the 80s, but somewhere else. It depends on your age. Then it is still important where these planets now are falling in the chart. This is going to tell us more about how you would go through this than the position of your natal Saturn, if that makes sense. So basically, we can look. I can send you all if you want, if you're interested. When we finish, I can go through all of your charts just to get a copy of them, as I have them all saved, I think, for all of you. And I can send you just a picture of the chart with the current transits, and you can very clearly see where the Capricorn planets are in which house. And then research the house, because the house is going to give you an idea about where this pressure is going to be felt mostly. Like now, I think, for example, Casper, I don't know where yours are, but from what you're telling us, that it's feeling more positive than not, may have a lot to do with the house in which in which Capricorn is in your birth chart. Because
okay, so I mean I just looked at it whilst you were talking,
yeah,
and in the transits they're both together, both Saturn and Pluto, sitting
yes,
right next to each other in the
that's
sixth
exactly
house.
what I'm saying. Yeah, that they are
Yeah,
together. They're conjuncting at the moment in the sky
yeah,
for everyone. Yeah.
yeah, in the sixth house.
So yours are in the sixth house, right? So let's use this as an example, as an illustration for everyone else. They're falling in the sixth house of everyday routine, work, health, and basically it's a lot of topics in the sixth house. But the sixth house is one of the introverted houses, one of the most introverted houses, the one that really likes studying on its own, basically delving into something that doesn't require a lot of human contact,
Yeah.
being very self-analytical, critical, and things like that. And also, it's about care for others. And uh, it's one of the isolationist areas of the chart. You know, the ones where we isolate ourselves. We're not very social. We're not very active. And if they are there, I think we're all just starting to live through this period. This period is very early in its unfoldment, and we are still to see how things are going to go forward. But if you come to me and I see those planets in your sixth house, I would say, actually, as calm as you are, take good care of your health. Keep doing sport. Keep doing, your daily chores and routine and so on, or concentrate on your work, because the sixth house is also about what we decide to invest our time on a daily basis in.
So
So
can I reference that, because it might be quite illustrative? So one of the things I've been telling everyone is fantastic, because I'm now reading and writing more than I did since even when I was at university, and I was quite studious. So I have literally been loading up, and that's why it feels so calm. It feels great. You can be alone, you can be in isolation. It's all about privacy, and you've got time to think and read. And I've been publishing things, something which I've been told my whole life. I should be writing more, I should be publishing things. And it's just like, it's like hyper-production,
yeah,
suddenly.
and that's
It's
so.
like mass
Thanks for
inspiration, and
sharing
you've
that.
got time to do it now.
Exactly. You seem to be one of those that this advice of do a project behind the scenes will probably fit the best, because the sixth house loves that sort of thing, of being able to produce something, or it's about skills a lot. The sixth house is very much about building a skill, learning something new, and as a result of that, becoming much better at what you do because you've got it now. So
can I make another comment just to, again,
yeah.
I don't want it to be about me. It's just I find it kind of illustrative. So for a long period of time, everyone's been telling me I should be teaching more, I should be doing more lecturing and things like that. And then all of a sudden, I'm now being invited to come and talk at universities and all these types of things, kind of effortlessly.
Mm-hmm.
It's all happening pretty smoothly. And the response from the students, because now I can talk about really random creative things. So for the past year, I've been talking about the next big phase in the economy, and everybody's been telling you, you're nuts, you're crazy, you're off the charts mad, but it sounds super interesting. And here we are. All the things I was lecturing about at the end of 2018 is basically what's happening, to the point about, what's happening in the markets, exactly which ones are trading where. So it's really kind of surreal. That's why I sort of find it's just the most extraordinary kind of coincidence with the thinking you had before. This is a real correlation.
Yes, and you put it very well. I don't really have anything to add to this because it's a very good illustration. And yeah, Laura, you're right as well. It's about where Saturn is falling on the chart. So there is a way on astro.com you can calculate not just your chart like normally, but there is an option there saying chart with transits. So when you have the transits on top of the chart as well, you can see this bunch of planets in Capricorn that are there now. It's not just Saturn and Pluto, but I'll tell you what else is going on, which is really the one that's the reason behind why, for example, this crisis happens now in March and not in February or in April or later on in the year, while Saturn and Pluto, the big players, they are together and they are in Capricorn already for some time, and they would be for some time. So why is it peaking now? Why is it starting now? That's to do with the other planets there as well. But you basically look at the transits and you see a bunch of planets in the handout that I have for you, which let's try to switch to it very quickly so I can show you. I hope you see this. Do you see this? Can anyone confirm?
Yes.
Perfect. So
yeah,
this is the chart of today at 3 o'clock. So ignore the houses because, if I had calculated the chart for 7 o'clock, it would be, these planets here that I've circled, they would be somewhere else on the wheel. Does that make sense? The wheel would have turned with the time. So it's just to show you the bunch of planets in Capricorn. They're all here in Capricorn. So that's Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn at the moment. And when you open your chart, you would have them on the outside of the wheel somehow. Yeah, so you have your chart is this one, and then the transiting planets will be the green ones around your chart. And you can see where this Capricorn group is falling on top of your chart, in which of the sectors, in which of the houses. Yeah. So you're gonna have that later on as well. And I don't know if you want to have another example, but for example, mine is in the 9th house, so they're traveling to my 9th house, and I was thinking that's such a good time to study and to teach as well, and do all sorts of things about finding philosophical truth. And I'm very much into this anyway. I like that house very much personally, but it doesn't sound that grave. You expect problems with more with education and knowledge and things like that, which sound not that serious as if you had the planets in the 7th house, for example, or if you had them in the 1st house or the 5th house, because these other houses are to do with very personal interrelationship issues. 7th house is the house of marriage and one-to-one intimate relationships and business relationships. The 5th house of children and the 4th house of family. So if you have them in one of those houses, it's a bit more scary because you're expecting that the pressure will be felt in that area of life and not in another. It's actually going to manifest there. Unfortunately, it's going to manifest mostly where they are traveling through. But it's a lot more complicated than that, because you really need to look at the chart as a whole picture, because sometimes these Capricorn planets will be making an angle, or they will be making an aspect, as we call it, to something else in your chart, which is very important. For example, if you are the sun in Aries, I think a few of you are Aries, yeah, or Cancer, or Libra, then what you're having is oppositions and squares to your sun from the group of planets in Capricorn. So this is a very, very personal thing. It's a very personal crisis. It becomes these otherwise very social factors becoming part of your life big time, if you have your sun affected, for example, in that way. So we can explore that separately. If anyone's interested, we can take a look at the current transits. It's a separate kind of consultation I do, which is, I think most of you have now done your birth charts. And I don't do the second one before we've done a birth chart one, before you have at least a general idea about your personal chart. But then the transiting consultation is more to do with how these external factors, which are the transits, the attack of the universe to us, basically, how are they affecting you personally? Which houses, which signs, which planets in your chart are going through something at the moment, and where you can expect over time things to develop. It just needs to be looked at properly. But now,
Can I just ask one thing, which I don't know if it's just me who's completely ignorant about astrology, but to what extent does it matter where these planets are in your natal chart? As you said, that's more to do how you perceive the situation rather than the actuality of the situation. Is that right?
So you have in your personal chart.
It doesn't have to be me, but just sort of generically.
Yes, I mean, when I say you, I don't mean you personally. I mean, every one of you has in their personal chart things that whatever you have in your personal chart, it doesn't change. It is there from day one, and you have still the same chart, because the chart is ultimately the positions of the planets at the point of your birth, at the time and day of your birth. And these were the transits at the time. So the transits of the 24th of October 1987 are my birth chart, if that makes sense. So at the time, these positions of the planets, everyone that was already alive was calling it transits. This particular arrangement, for example, to have the Sun conjunct Pluto in Scorpio, something like that. This was a transit at the time. But because I was born in that moment, this becomes my birth chart, and this never changes. So this colors my perspective of the world, as you said. So I now start seeing everything and experiencing everything through the unique combination of things that are in my chart. And we are all living in the same reality, maybe, even though reality is about how you perceive things. It's how much of it you can perceive, what your senses are limited to, and this is a long topic. But we have different birth charts, so we are equipped with different tools, with different lenses, and that's why we feel differently, even though the same thing is happening to everyone at the moment. But what is going on right now is that this thing that's happening to everyone is uniquely strong. It's stronger than usual. It's one of those phases of, let's say, of history, and that's reflected through astrology. Through astrology, we can have the explanation about why this is happening, why now, basically, why this crisis is now, and why we need it in the first place. But this is for everyone. The transits, current transits, which is the positions of the planets now in the sky, they are the atmosphere. They're let's say, the weather forecast, but it's more psychological weather forecast of how things are right now. And now when you mix this with your birth chart, then you can have some sort of prediction or idea of how you personally will be dealing with the situation. Whether you'll be more resilient, whether you would like it or not like it. For example, if someone is by birth very Saturnian or very Plutonian, which means Saturn or Pluto are very strong in the chart. This can be in many different ways, but I mean, if you have your birth chart done, you would be told that, for example, a certain planet is very strong, but another is not that active. But let's say, for example, someone is very Saturnian by nature, which means either they have Capricorn ascendant or moon or something like that, or they have many planets in Capricorn, or they have many things in the 10th house. It's astrology is complicated. I don't want to overwhelm you with the details, but there can be someone that's a lot more in tune with the Capricorn archetype. Basically, they like it more, they work with it more easier, they explore it easier. And when these times come, as now, this group of people are more privileged in a way, as it's almost like their time has come to shine or to do something with it, or basically they're in a better position in one way or another, as they are more familiar with that energy, and they have been presumably working with it all their life because they have it in the birth chart. So they kind of have a better instinct of how to handle it. Well, if I have other things going on in my chart, as I said, if I have lots of Aries, lots of Libra, for example, then this Capricorn thing going on at the moment is going to be very uncomfortable for me, because it's directly challenging the energies in my chart. It is putting them under pressure, because Capricorn is in a natural square in astrology to Aries and Libra. So we have Aries and Libra, and Capricorn is at 45 degrees from them, which is a dynamic in astrology which shows pressure, challenge, competitiveness. Like two things cannot have both of their ways. One has to compromise. It's a very difficult dynamic. It's the most difficult dynamic. So if I am one of those people, I would feel directly challenged. I would feel like I have to really mobilize myself and fight against an enemy kind of situation. You see how it can be very, personally, it can be very different. And that's why in those critical turning points, some people in life are big. It's not always possible to predict by just looking at the birth chart what is going to happen, because every negative aspect, let's say there is no such thing as negative, but every stressful aspect, like a square, could be very helpful, because you are kind of pushed to give the best of yourself. You're pushed to use the maximum of your potential, of your abilities. And at the end of the day, you went through hell while others were sleeping in the couch and they were very peaceful. But you won at the end because you achieved something very significant in that period, while they didn't. So it's very tricky to say which aspect is good or bad and how it's going to play out, because at the end of the day, astrology is not deterministic. At the end of the day, is what is going to push things in one direction or the other. It's just how you use your own energies. But if you dream about having 7 planets in Capricorn right now in your birth chart and you don't, there is no way to compensate that. There is no way to totally adjust yourself in a very, very good way to the Capricorn situation if you don't have the right energies for that. You
So
have
can I ask in relation to that just two things? So we can do it obviously for natal charts for each one of us. And could you do the same in a very, I mean, not now necessarily, perhaps that's for another time or just as a brief comment, but could you do the same for countries? I mean, there's obviously a high concentration of people here based in Valencia and the surrounding region. I mean, that could possibly be interesting for them. Again, the more you know, the more you can prepare, etc. And then just one final question. So what happens when there are no planets, like absolutely nada in whatever sign? For example, Capricorn, when it's just one big empty space.
You mean in the birth chart you don't have any planets in Capricorn?
For example, so we all understand the sort of interplay and the dynamics and so on, like you just described very well. But so what happens when there's an empty field? Either in the ones that you mentioned, like Aries or Libra, which are obviously important because of the relationship with it, or the sign itself.
Yeah, if you don't have any planets in Capricorn, or what we call the cardinal signs are Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, and Aries. So this is like a cross. You can imagine it. Imagine them as a cross. Libra is with Aries and Capricorn is with Cancer, and they cross like two axes. So if you don't have anything like that in your chart, which is possible, then it's one thing that this can mean is that it's going to be a bit more peaceful for you, as no buttons are being pushed. If there is no planet there in these signs, this planet is basically not making an aspect. There is nothing there to make an aspect with um, a major aspect, because everything is always making aspects, different angles, but only some of them are important and are showing something as a result. But if you don't have anything, then the way to figure it out is to look at the house, just at the house itself, the topic of that house, the many topics, like we said about the 6th house or the 9th house. So I don't have anything in the 9th house where these Capricorn planets are traveling at the moment in my particular chart. But still, my 9th house, this area of my life, is affected by the dynamic. And, just the whole circumstances around me are playing out in a way that I am pushed into the direction of paying attention to 9th house things, reading more, exploring more, all sorts of philosophizing, and maybe developing my also something I was postponing for so many months, and many of you have been encouraging me to do it, and to finally sit down and do it properly, was to, for example, do my website all right. Like, it's unfinished. It doesn't explain what a birth chart consultation is all about and what you can expect from it, for example, or it doesn't explain anything about me, my approach, which is like the big idea behind say what I'm doing. And this is a 9th house topic, the big idea, the general philosophy. So now this is just I'm trying to illustrate how I'm trying to make sense for myself, looking at my personal chart, of what I'm meant to be doing in this period, what I'm meant to be concentrating on. And if I decide to concentrate on something completely different, then it's just not going to work, or it will feel pushed, it will feel forced, and probably just the whole circumstances around me won't be there. If you have family, for example, houses affected, then that may be a reason for concern a little bit, because these things tend to work like a real clock, a real predictable, in the big scale of things, in the structure of things, clock, where if the concentration of energy is now in the transits is so great and so unusually great, that you have to watch out in the area where these planets are. Just watch out. And if something is to happen, then at least there is an explanation why exactly now and why in this house. Yeah. So I don't know. It doesn't sound very optimistic, but so Maya is saying, okay. No, I'm actually having a hard time keeping up with the chat. So yeah, the relationship between them, Casper, that's right, between the planets. Do you want to maybe use your microphones more than the chat? Because I just when I talk, I forget to read, and it's a bit difficult to read at the same time. So yeah, someone's saying that they're transiting in their 10th house. I don't know who that is actually. It's a number 456900. Who is that? A mystery person here among us. Anyway. Oh, you that's okay. Okay, great. So yeah, the 10th house is repeating the same topic as Capricorn and Saturn, and because it's the house related to these same things. The house of career, the house of social reputation, all cliches are these, but actually that's where we have to participate, want it or not. And we've just adopted that career explanation because this is the most usual way people go out in the world and do something which is more or less prominent, more or less visible, and taking part of a bigger organization kind of thing, and basically showing themselves and trying to make a name for themselves. But now in this, I think in the current situation, maybe the 10th house will be also about whether in the crisis out in the world, whether you can act decisively, whether you can be helpful to other people, whether you can be compassionate enough, and to just be effective, because the key word to Saturn is effectiveness, really making a difference with what you do, not just wishing well, but also being able to contribute with something tangible. Saturn is very tangible, unfortunately. Now, I started with Saturn, but Saturn is only speeding up the events. Saturn is only kind of saying, yes, this year, 2020, and not the years around it, we are going to cross the threshold. But Saturn is a smaller factor than Pluto. The world is really changing, and this is more to do with Pluto than with Saturn, because Saturn as an executive kind of figure is just coming in and enacting it. Almost like somebody passed a law in the government, and Saturn is the executive part that comes and enforces the law. But actually, this was starting to brew from several years back. And now I'm going to switch to Pluto. I'm completely lost in time, and I'm happy to stay more if you guys want to stay more. I think you see the picture. I was going to give you some dates at the end. And if you need to go, because it's already 5, you can, but I'll send you the handout and everything. But if you are happy to stay, I'll stay for at least another hour, if that's all right with you. Yeah? Are you okay with this? All right. Let's see how it goes. And I won't keep you too long. It's not going to be like one of those meetings at home, I promise. It's going to be much shorter. So Pluto is the more important player. I'm switching to it now because that's, well, people don't understand Pluto yet. I don't know if we're ever going to understand it completely. It's not very tangible, it's not very human, but it's a lot more painful than Saturn, because Saturn are practical problems. So Saturn poses practical problems, and they can be resolved, they can be overcome. We can find a solution eventually. So you've lost your job, you can find a new one. Yes, it may take time, but eventually it will be resolved. Or any sort of thing like this. But Pluto is a psychological force. So Pluto is related to Scorpio in astrology. I don't know how much you like or dislike Scorpio, with its very intense reputation. But Pluto is the new ruler of Scorpio. There is a traditional ruler, which is Mars. So before they knew about Pluto, which is until quite recently, because Pluto came into the picture of the world and astrology in 1930 when it was discovered. 1930 is not such a long time ago. It's less than 100 years ago. So only for less than 100 years ago, we're dealing with this new force, which was always there, but we never saw it. We never knew about it. And these last 3 planets, they're very similar. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, consecutively found in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, that step by step, they were bringing into the picture a new thing that everyone needs to get used to. Everyone needs to accept, needs to learn as something beyond Saturn. So we have Saturn in the order of the solar system. We have Saturn, then we have Uranus, then Neptune, and then Pluto. So the last 3 are a group of their own. They're a completely different thing from everything that's up to Saturn. Saturn is like you have a body, and the boundaries of your body are the skeleton is Saturn. But if we imagine that we have an aura as well that's invisible, then the other three planets, one of which is Pluto. Pluto is like the most distant part of your aura, the one that eventually touches other people's auras, and the one that's like the most ephemeral and the most difficult for you to touch yourself and to understand yourself. This is Pluto. And Pluto is the big force of change in history. It takes so long for Pluto to go around the zodiac that every time it changes sign, or every time it comes back to the same sign, there is no way to avoid the death, how it's called, death and rebirth crisis. Something needs to be wiped out when Pluto comes along. So as Pluto travels through the signs of the zodiac, it brings to the forefront things in society, topics in society that we need to face without fear. We need to look at them, even though they're not nice to look at, because they're difficult. Pluto is the area of the psyche that is the most deep-seated emotions and fears. The things that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to even recognize in ourselves, and most of them are actually very unconscious, and we cannot deal with them anyway. But imagine at the moment with this fear everywhere that's building up. I may be a bit arrogant saying, oh, I don't feel the fear or something like this, because let's say I've decided to have a more cool attitude to it, just until now. But still there is something inside me that's reacting to the whole picture. And there is still a fear, there is still something, and to a different extent with everyone. And this is just being added to my personal fears that are there all the time, and some of them may be triggered now in this critical situation. So imagine the kind of aura that the whole group of people out there in the world, the whole society is having at the moment, is creating at the moment. Feelings that are very negative, very destructive, and could be extremely selfish as well, but they're not even recognized, they're not even expressed. So that Pluto holds the potential of accumulation of a lot of negative energy in society that can explode if it's provoked. So what is happening now is a provocation of fear. We are all being told, take measures and be careful, and which may be great, maybe the right thing to do. I'm not saying the opposite, but this is creating a certain psychological atmosphere, which is a negative one. We are expecting something bad to happen, and this is when the darkest sides of the character come along. Pluto rules that in astrology. Those things in us which are extreme dark, extreme, how can I say, egoistic, and not wanting to, trying to save itself when others may suffer and things like that. But this is just one side of it. It's only one side of it. The other one is exactly opposite. Pluto is the biggest potential that you have, the biggest inner goal and mission. And if you follow the positive Pluto, you would be willing to realize that nothing small is important, that nothing day to day is so important, that the most important thing at the end of the day is the big conclusion of Pluto, is to follow your own path, your own potential, your own birth chart, basically, and to do what you have to do. And this is the best way, through your individual contribution, however small it is, to be part of the big picture, because Pluto is about the really big picture, where we are all one, want it or not. And Pluto takes 250 years to go around. So just going back, you see how important it is that Pluto is now activating these same things, and again in Capricorn. So actually, I don't know if you know, but Scorpio and Capricorn are the two signs that have the worst reputation of melancholy and depression, and seeing things seeing more the bad than the good, or being willing to deal with dark subjects, taboo subjects, especially Scorpio. And Pluto is very much pushing us in that direction because it wants to expose everything in a person or in a society or in a whatever that is not sincere, that is not truthful. It's like an advocate for the ultimate truth. And if you're trying to cut corners or to pretend about something, it doesn't matter, or to impose your power on other people, or Pluto is not going to tolerate that. It's the energy that will bring it to the surface. And now, as we're living through these transits, we will see a lot of dirt in society coming to the surface. A lot of painful things that we don't want to see, we don't want to deal with, but they would be very, very obviously exposed. And I think from what I saw this morning in the shop, I didn't believe I'm going to see this there already so soon and so fast. But it's absolutely awful to see how some, I don't know, selfish hoarders have bought all the paper and all the bread and you know, everything, and there are at the same time elderly people in there that don't have the basics. And it's just starting. It's just about all sorts of examples of human bad nature and what it can breed is under the rule of Pluto. If we didn't have Pluto in the picture now, and if it was just Saturn, then we would have some maybe short-term financial crisis. Certain things are going to shift slightly, but not that large scale, not that global. But Pluto is what's making it global and what's making it universal in a way. So Pluto was last in Capricorn, so now it's in Capricorn, but remember, it's so much slower than Saturn. So when we look back at when it was last time in Capricorn, this was in 1762 to 1792. Wow, that's such a long time ago. I think I even don't know anything about that period, not much at all. It sounds very long time ago. It's almost roughly 250 years back in time from now. And what happened there was this colonization of the world. The colonization of the territories as we know it. Research it if you want, but that was a big change. That was a very big change. Definitely things were not the same after that period. And especially things like the revolution in America, the revolution in Europe, many examples in these years, 1762, 1792, they're very emblematic to similar turning point as now. And before that, we had it in 1515 to 1544, so another 250 years back. And that was the age of the Enlightenment, and when Martin Luther started that reformation of the church process. So why is this important? Because up to that point, we're talking about Middle Ages, up to that point, the church was like unquestionable authority. And it's very Capricornian as well, a very Capricornian topic, the authority of the church. And this was shattered completely. Nothing was like it before. Afterwards. And after this Reformation, actually, the church and religion started losing its hold little by little, and it was starting to be more important what the government says, or the king says, or whatever, the secular authority, than the church authority, which was again a very big game changer in the topic of societal organization. And then you can go even further back. I don't want to. There is no point. It's just to illustrate that these things are cyclic, and there comes a time when we need to make a step collectively in a different direction. and it's just unavoidable. In the year, for example, in the year 1100 approximately, before Christ, very, very, very long time ago, Pluto was again in Capricorn, and we had the Trojan War. Yeah, so I don't know how well you hear me. I hope it's not losing the connection. And yes, details and examples, but this is a very big cycle. And Pluto, and this time around, Pluto entered Capricorn in our time in 2008. So Pluto hasn't just come to Capricorn. Actually, Saturn came more recently, because Saturn is, the quicker one, the one that changes its place quickly. So Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008. Going back to 2008, we remember the crash of the retail estate market and the crisis there. So it wasn't uneventful, but this was like the beginning, I know, the beginning of the end kind of thing, because that's when Pluto started his journey through this sign. And it was like the beginning of when we started reforming institutions and started questioning governments or big organizations. And this was the epicenter of the big change in the background. It wasn't felt on the everyday basis that much, because Pluto is a big force. It's not like acting today and just today, but it's a long process. But this process actually started in 2008. And now, when Saturn came to Pluto, again in Capricorn, it combined forces with it. And as I said before, Saturn materializes. Saturn makes real. It really enacts the wall. So yes, it's almost like they were planning for that for a very long time, and it was prepared and prepared. But now came the time when it was activated, like a bomb was activated, something like that. I don't know if it makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting also, I think, just finally, to see when was the last time that so what was the most recent cycle of Pluto and Saturn? So that means we have them together now. They're starting something new now. But when was the last time they were together and they were doing a similar thing? That was in 1982. 1982. Both of them were in Libra, another sign. So now they're in Capricorn. At the time, they were in Libra. And if you were born around that time, 1982, 1983, something like that, you would probably have in your chart Saturn and Pluto in Libra, and very close together. And so that was for a period of about 2 years. But 1982 is the peak year. So there was another conjunction then. In a similar way, I think, as what is happening today has its background, and it's basically the process started in 2008, which is what, about 12 years from now, something like that. Then we had something similar when, from what started happening, especially in countries like Bulgaria, where I come from, I hear people say, older people say, we were starting to feel like things are going to be changed in the communist regime, that this regime is probably not going to last, even though we've been living in it for the last 30 years, 40 years and more. And then something big is brewing, basically. We were starting to feel that, they say, from the beginning of the 80s, which is 1982, roughly. And then Saturn came to Pluto, and basically when the other planets, there was, in the end of the 90s, there was Uranus, there was Neptune, again in Capricorn, then it really happened. Then it really turned around, basically, but it was kind of prepared. So it's these cycles of planets, so something that the two of them come together, like Pluto and Saturn, then the faster one continues forward. There comes a time when they're square to each other. Then there comes a time when they're opposite to each other. Next is when they're square again, but from the other side, and they come back together again. So the parallel to this is exactly like the moon. So the conjunction of two planets is the new moon situation. Then the first square is the how's it called? The half first quarter moon. Yeah, the first quarter moon, which is just 1 week after the new moon. Then we have the opposition, which is the full moon thing. And then we have the second square, that's the second quarter of the moon. So Saturn and Pluto were doing this as well. And these 4 years in which these things happen are, so we're starting from 1982, the conjunction. Then we have in 1993, the first square. 1993 was a very eventful year as well. We can Google it and see why. So what happens is they met in 1982 and they started something. We're looking at Libra to see what they started. So it was the cooperation between nations topic kind of thing, the cooperation and also revolution in relationships, personal relationships among people. We had the AIDS epidemic at the end of the 90s. So this is all history kind of mirrored into the aspects. When you hear this for the first time, it's very confusing because it's so many dates and so many planets and things like that. But I'm trying to just give you a tip that these cycles and their crucial points of them, the beginning, the middle, the end, the 2 squares, they are unfolding the process as we go along. They're basically making it happen, that thing that starts with the conjunction. So then we have 2001. The year 2001 is the opposition of Saturn and Pluto. The last time we had an opposition. So we all know what happened in 2001 and how much this changed everything in the United States, but not just in the United States, but everywhere. And then we had the second square, 2009, between the two. So now they're back together again. It's just it's a cycle. It's a cycle of 2 things traveling together. I hope this wasn't too technical, but you see how history is reflecting the astrological positions. I want to go back to Pluto again, but if you want to ask something or stop me or whatever, comment something, any questions?
Maybe just some kind of, if to the extent that it's interesting, like Ronald Reagan was elected in 1981, I think. I mean, he actually took his position and then, began his, let's say, his advocacy for confronting the Soviet Union and communism, particularly starting in 82. So that kind of makes sense, or reflects what you're saying about things are beginning to crumble, or being challenged.
Yes,
in that regard. And then you've got the whole sort of 80s movement of individualism and basically investment banking taking off, and the finance sector going on steroids. And then in 93, that's really interesting because that's basically when, and a lot of people don't kind of realize the magnitude of this, but in 93 is when they sat down with the Uruguay round, and it eventually became what was known as GATT, which today is known as the World Trade Organization. Now, GATT at the time was a massive thing because this was about global free trade, something that had never existed previously. And there were a lot of people, there were few people at the time who I follow, or have been following, one of them being James Goldsmith, who was a curious character, billionaire, and ostensibly one of the establishment, who famously went on record saying, you sign this and in 20, 30 years, you will find yourself basically describing the world that we have today. It's very interesting. He said, you will have mass migrations from the countryside into the city. You will have intensified farming, which will seriously challenge the environment. It'll result in impoverization from people who used to farm the land sustainably and now migrating into becoming industrial workers in the city, which is alienating and destructive for the value of a life. Really interesting. So on one hand, so you've got these. contradictory forces between universalism, liberalism, free trade, internationalism, blah, 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 but at the same time, the consequences that it has. And let's call it a subtle kind of elite, because we always think of the elites as just sort of very rigorous, top-down, imposing their will in a very unilateral form, whereas this is far more subtle. But I think we're all coming to realize that this paradigm that they've been advocating, which was supposed to be beneficial for all, has had dramatic consequences for inequality. So that's why it makes sense that that cycle has almost contradicted itself and therefore needs to be challenged. Hence 2008, 2020.
Yes, it all makes sense if you follow a certain cycle unfolding, and you can do this with any combination of two planets. You can study this because the information is out there. There are tables of positions called ephemeris, where you can follow over time, let's say over the course of a year, where a planet is traveling and what degree and so on. So that's a bit more advanced, but practically it can be done. And there are very good books about this, where others have already done it, and we can just read the correspondences of different stages of cycles of planets and things happening in the world. And usually it's rather simple that whatever this planet stands for, the two, let's say, whatever the two that we're looking at stand for, they have, a bunch of symbols attached to them. And we can start having those associations in our head about what would happen when these two things first combine and plot something new and begin something new, or plant it. Then what will happen in the first stage of challenge when these two things are basically testing what they started? This is the first square of their relationship. Then when they oppose each other is really seeing what this was all about kind of stage. And then at the end, we travel towards this being kind of relinquished or reformed or rethought about, and basically getting rid of it little by little because its time has been served, and starting something new with the next conjunction, and based on the topics of the two planets. But it happens now that because Pluto and Saturn in particular are so societal planets, they're so big picture planets, that it is impossible not to expect that there will be big changes, and they will affect everyone, everywhere. Also because Capricorn is not like Libra. So what you gave as examples, Casper, which was really interesting and helpful to know the details, but this was under the previous cycle of their relationship, just before this one, and that was in Libra. So Libra is to do with relationship, as I said, and with how to join forces in society, but where we're still very inexperienced in this, where countries, for example, are just starting to reach out to each other and try to cooperate and do things and work it out, a working relationship for later on, and all the conflicts that result out of this. But now Capricorn is something, it's a different game. Capricorn is about very, very deep-seated institutions and traditions that will need to go, and they have been there for a very long time. Everything that Saturn builds or Capricorn stands for is something that is like a massive castle, for example. It's not a wooden house. It's something that has stood the test of time, and it's going to be so painful now because we would have to part with things that are very, very familiar, not just for us, but to our parents, to our grandparents, to many generations before us. There was a group of things that we all took for granted, even though change is now very, very fast, and it's especially in our time. But still, there are several things left that the concept of the state, for example, the countries or financial institutions, or how we handle money, or how we all sorts of big things like that, they would be now turning around. They would be how it's called, destroyed in one way or another, and something new would have to replace them. And I can't even begin to imagine how much of a resistance that would create. out there, and how many people will not want to give up what they have, or just don't want to comply with the new things. And not all the new things will be positive, I guess. There will be a lot of repression, a lot of I fear, probably the most personally, I fear the first stage of this thing that's now starting, and how it can be very almost dictatorial. I don't know if you would. What are you doing? Or very authoritative. I think, regardless of what we think about the virus, for example, whether it's real, whether it's not real, whether it's big chance to get ill or not, this doesn't matter for the moment. What I'm really fearing is that it will be used as an excuse to impose other things, other restrictions, and to basically take away freedoms of all sorts, individual freedoms, to the pretext that society is going to protect us, or the system is going to protect us. And of course, we are going to willingly and voluntarily agree with that, because we are so scared and we don't want to risk it. So, and I don't possibly see a way to counteract this. There is no way to counteract. Let's imagine, just imagine, and this is not supposed to be the case, but let's imagine that it's not really that serious, and it's some sort of a choreographed thing, and 5% of people know it, and they want to do something about this and kind of resist. What will happen to these people? They would be totally smashed. They would be totally like lynched, because they would be perceived as those that don't want to, that they're putting everybody else's health at risk. And this sort of talking is already going on here in the first page of Metro supermarket today. Metro newspaper. It's one of those everyday papers in the underground. I don't know if you know it. It's free, so everyone has it. Not a very big one, not a very reputable one, but it's, yeah. And the first page was how an elderly man is in the shop, and all the shelves are empty, and they look like, I mean, they're desperate because they can't buy anything or whatever. And it says underneath something of the sort of, look at that picture and be ashamed. But it was really like direct, like direct shaming. Like, you don't know to whom you're addressing it, but it's like, I'm really fearing that it's gonna get fierce. It's gonna get fierce out there, people against people. In this panic, who knows what's gonna happen? We probably will start attacking each other and things like that, just because of the insecurity. I don't know what you think, but I mean, it's a bit.
Can I because I asked it earlier on, and I think it's becoming even more relevant now, because I think you're absolutely right, but I think different countries, because we're still countries to the extent that they still remain, have their own cultures and their own customs and traditions, and they have their own characters, and we all know that, which is why we travel and go to different places. And I think in situations like this, as in every other kind of extreme circumstances, different nations are bound to act differently. So I think if there is a possibility of sort of very quickly looking at the likely reactions for the countries that are relevant for the people here, I said it before, but Spain obviously features pretty prominently for most of the people here. Maybe that could be interesting.
Mm-hmm. But Casper, the big problem with that, even though you're right, but what you're saying is so true in the light of the past, and in the light of how things were to this point. But let's think about how this, if this becomes more serious. It's just my perspective on that. I'm not trying to have an argument with you, but it's just like a different way of looking into this. Is that maybe countries will start losing their separateness, their individual character, because if this thing becomes very global, as it is, I mean, it's fast getting global. I don't know if we've never seen in our lifetime, none of us, even the slightly older among us, we've never seen something so quickly unfolding as a global crisis, I think, so far. And it's only been a few weeks. And Pluto, going back to Pluto again, is creating situations where there is no more nations, there is no more societies, there is no more cultures. It's bare human nature. That's what Pluto is about. Saturn is about cultures and societies. It's about the Saturn culture in one place of the world is completely different than the Saturn culture of another place, which basically means the way this society has decided to organize itself, it has decided to govern itself. This is Saturn. The particulars of that, whether it is easy to set up a business easier in the UK than in Spain, for example, or is it easier to, go out and communicate with people in Spain than in the UK? These particulars, these differences. But I think with what's going on now, we are going to come closer to human against human and this globalization kind of thing. Funny enough, I was thinking years ago, especially in the last years when we were, because I read those astrological journals and they discuss actively the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and all the other things this year, but they started discussing them several years back. And I was thinking, oh, the only thing that can create that sort of turnaround, which we imagine, is aliens coming from space. That was the only, or ecological crisis of some sort. These were the two ideas I had that may happen, because these are kinds of things that totally abolish the idea about countries. And it's about, well, initially there will be, every country will try to survive, maybe to the expense of another country, and there'll probably be some sort of fighting for resources and things like that. But I never thought of a virus. I thought either some sort of extra planetary threat from the outside, like the Earth being attacked, or being something happens to the Earth as a whole, because that's the only scenario where we stop thinking about borders and about differences and races and stuff like that, but we are all in the same boat, kind of thing. And Pluto has this effect. Pluto is over society. It's like even alien kind of thing, alien kind of energy, something that's just what's common between us just because we are human, if that makes sense.
No, I get it completely, and it's pretty clear that's what's probably confronting us. Nevertheless, and I don't want to labor the point. I mean, take for example under communism. I mean, it was a very different experience, even though they're all repressed by the same centralized regime. It was a very different experience in Latvia and Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, than it was, for example, in Romania or Russia or elsewhere. So that's kind of my point. But all confronted with the same challenge, which has the same universal kind of theme to it, but nonetheless, just like people are different, given the same circumstances, different people tend to react differently.
I agree with you completely. I agree with you that especially in the beginning, it's going to probably make a big difference. Countries handling this how, and there will be good examples, bad examples, different creative ideas. I guess some countries will adjust, because also somebody asked the question earlier about country signs, and yes, the UK is Capricorn. I think I was suspicion that. I may sound too in favor of conspiracy theories to you, and believe me, I'm not trying to be. It's just trying to think logically. I didn't have a rational explanation for myself why the UK decided now to go out of the European Union and actually did it. I didn't. I mean, it just didn't make sense. And we were talking here between us that when it was underway and still not final, we're saying, oh, something is going to happen in the world, and they know what it's going to be, and they want to be separate so that they can react in their own way. This is just a theory. I mean, they can have the autonomy because at the end of the day, they have these very old institutions, they have a different sort of society. And if they were in a situation that they have to comply with what the whole European Union does in a crisis like this, then they would be not happy about it at all. They would probably very, very much prefer to have their own say, at least in the beginning. So, and that's what's happening at the end of the day. Now, England is outside of the EU, and this exactly when this happened, straight after that. So, are we not right to suspect that maybe this was known, at least in some circles, or at least somewhere in the bigger picture? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I actually wanted to tell you something else in response to your question, that you gave an example of how the changes in the politics at the end of the 80s and the 90s affected differently the different countries, but Pluto was not involved in the picture at the time. It was actually, but in a different sort of relationship, in a different sort of aspect. But now Pluto is involved, and Pluto is part of it. When you have a conjunction in astrology, the conjunction is like blending different substances in the same container. So like mixing things together, and the nature of each one of these planets is no longer the pure nature of what this is meant to be, what is meant to stand for. It becomes a mixture of these whole all the things that they put inside the container. So it's a different world now. It's a different situation. It's again a crisis. That's what's common between them, and it's still to do with organization of society. I suspect that this one is going to be much bigger than the previous one. Almost like the previous one was a rehearsal what needs to happen now. Generally, they say that this whole transition is about everything entering the age of Aquarius. Us making this big transition, which is another big topic. I don't want to overwhelm you guys with also all sorts of cycles and dates of those cycles and things like that. But actually, there is a much bigger cycle behind this, and it's called the cycle of the precession of the equinoxes, which is 26,000 years almost. And now we are in one of those very, very interesting times. It's very unusual to be born in such a time where ages switch, because we don't know exact dates about this. It's impossible to know. But around the time that we're living through and the next years to come, we're expecting that this transition is happening. And that's between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. So we had over 2,000 years in the age of Pisces. And now we're basically starting a new 2,000-year period. So when you put all those astrological factors on top of each other, you look at Pluto, you look at Saturn, you look at this, you would find out that just now, and especially this year, everything is like accumulated. It's piling up. It's just activated. It's like no other time. It's extremely interesting time. It's probably going to be very difficult, but it's an extremely interesting time to be alive, I think. You know what? You all seem very somber today and very like, you don't have happy faces. At least I don't see them in the camera at all. Hey, yeah, Natalie has a happy face. And Anna with her contagious smile. Yeah. Well, you see, Maya is the most serious because she's got the moon in Capricorn. Congratulations, Maya.
Thank you. I'm getting the best of it.
Directly affected by the whole.
Alina, I wanted to ask you, when astrologically speaking is meant to get smoother?
Yeah, I knew that somebody's gonna ask that. I knew it.
Hello.
That's the most important question, isn't it? Ever since the beginning. So there is now. Why March? I'll start from something else and I'll get there. Promise. So just to give you like the background of this year, just this year now. So Saturn and Pluto were conjunct in January, and they are still conjunct, but it's kind of, Saturn is moving forward from Pluto slowly, slowly. So it's kind of getting away from it now. The cycle has already started, but it's a long-term thing. This Saturn-Pluto thing is for about 2 years, usually, the big effect of it. But these 2 years didn't start in January. They started a little bit before because, as I said, Pluto is in Capricorn since 2008, and Saturn is in Capricorn since the end of 2017. So before the actual conjunction happened, there was last year, they were still both in Capricorn. Yeah, if that makes sense. So for the whole of last year, they were both in Capricorn, but the conjunction hadn't happened yet. It happened now in January. Now, so now it's getting interesting, basically. Now it's starting to get eventful. But what is making it eventful is that this month in March, another planet, Mars, which is very different. Mars is very fast. It's one of the personal planets. He's also in Capricorn. It's actually in Capricorn as we speak. So Mars is a more of an everyday activator of things, situations. Mars is not, is traveling around. So basically it stays in a sign for a month, roughly. Usually it's very rough, but about a month to 40 days, something like that. So that's the, basically imagine it this way. These big two players, Saturn and Pluto, are in Capricorn, and now they're visited by Mars for a month, exactly this month. And it is going to very soon go out of it. So Mars is soon getting out of Capricorn. So, I don't have the date exactly, but I can check. You can check that as well, very easy. If you type in Google Mars in Capricorn 2020, it will give you start date, end date. And I think very, very soon, I looked at it yesterday, it's towards the end of Capricorn now. So Mars is the planet of physical energy, stamina, aggression, and assertion of will. It's very physical and it's very fiery in its nature. It is like a ticking bomb, but a little one. It's basically the thing that it's the button of the bomb or something. I don't know how to explain, but it's the last drop of the chemical reaction where, you know, you have mixed a few things, and then the moment you put the drop of mass into it, it all explodes. It's an activator energy. It's a short-term activator. So this brings incidents like your car breaks down or you suffer violence, things like that. The more everyday human situations is what Mars is related to. So we have a big mix of Mars in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, Saturn in Capricorn. So it's almost like Mars is coming this month to begin the outside manifestation or showing, or I don't know, of whatever the big players are preparing in the background as a team, as a topic. So I expect that the moment Mars goes forward, at the moment it's so interesting that if you look at the chart for today, which is at the bottom of the thing I'm going to send you, it's only Earth and water in the chart. So all the planets are in feminine signs, in passive introverted signs, in depressive signs. Like, I mean, just expressing the negative of them, not everything. But it's, imagine what atmosphere that creates. There is no fire, there is no air. Today we have the moon, luckily, finally we have the moon in Aquarius today. So this is the only one that makes an exception. So today, everything else is in Earth, either Capricorn or Taurus, and yesterday even the moon was in Capricorn. So yesterday was a big day. Yesterday was a day that even the moon was in Capricorn, together with all the others. Yeah, I don't know how you felt yesterday, but it was pretty strong pressure day. And here in the UK, which is Capricorn, so the sun sign of the UK is Capricorn, that's the day when they implemented the harsher measures to prevent the virus and so on. So before yesterday, it was one atmosphere. since yesterday, it's completely changed. Like when you go out in the street, it's a different story now, today. So another couple of weeks, I think, for the Mars situation to slightly calm down. But the bad news is that Mars is coming back. So this is such a difficult year for other reasons as well. You probably know that planets sometimes go retrograde, and that these periods of retrograde planets are very tough when we talk about not just Mercury, which is more often, and we are tired to listen about Mercury retrograde, but Mars and Venus can also be retrograde from time to time. But this is very not very often. So Mars and Venus only become retrograde roughly every 2 years for about a month. So every 2 years for about a month. And now this year, we would have that for both of them. Both Mars and Venus will be retrograde this year, which is, I mean, another reason to be, I don't know, another thing that's going to overcomplicate the situation. So Mars retrograde this year. So this is going to be a difficult time to act. Mars is about acting, about being proactive, being, achieving things out in the world. When it's retrograde, this whole thing slows down. Business slows down, productiveness slows down, all those sorts of things. In general, that's happening every time Mars is retrograde. But this time it's going to be part of a bigger scheme, because later in the year, this is between September and December. That's why they say, maybe you've read somewhere that especially if you read astrological analysis, that the toughest time is going to be between September and November. That's the period of Mars retrograde, because Mars at that time is going to be in the sign Aries. So not only retrograde, but in Aries. Mars is at home in Aries. It rules Aries. So it's like a double Mars, double aggression, double explosion. Yeah. And Aries is square Capricorn. So you see, do you see the picture? Basically, if we're having a big activation this month by Mars, because this month Mars is in Capricorn, in the same sign as the Pluto and Saturn and so on, then later in the year, between September and November, Mars is going to attack the same planets, but now as a square, not as a conjunction. And that's harder. That's expected to be harder. Expected to be real conflict, real challenge, real losses maybe. Now, very pessimistic, but whatever is to happen is going to probably have its peak, real peak, at the end of the year. And there will be expectedly a period in between, which will be like a, how is it called when the storm hasn't started yet? What was that expression? The calm before the storm.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
The calm before the storm.
Calm before the storm. So maybe we're gonna have some sort of fresh air for a while, hopefully. I don't know, during the summer. But during the summer we've got Venus retrograde, which is another challenge, because not every year we have Venus retrograde. This year we have even that on top of everything else. And that's going to be, I think, between May and June and July, something like that. Don't get married in Venus retrograde. That's not going to work. Definitely. Don't get into a serious relationship, or don't go. It tends to bring back to past relationships and to, it's anecdotal, but exes start calling during Venus retrograde. And yeah, don't give them a second chance. Something like that is the general advice. So so yeah, this is just a joke, but Venus retrograde will be in that middle period between the two Mars effects, the one now and the one in September, October. So I don't know. I unfortunately I can't give you a lot of hope, but what I can say is just my personal way of thinking is that I'm very Plutonian by birth. I like Pluto, even though it's not very nice. And it's got Pluto has one big lesson, and that's to surrender. So Pluto wants us to not try to fight with something that's so much bigger than us that we just need to surrender, in this case, to the big cycles and the big changes, and basically just try to adapt, but in a way that's not forced. That's not. Pluto will always win. We have no chance against Pluto. So we have to somehow adjust. But if you know that this is for the good, I mean, this doesn't solve any practical problem to know that at the moment, but it is always for the good. What Pluto does is cleaning and disposing of everything that we don't need anymore. So if this is like a painful operation now, that's cutting off something that we're very used to, that we're very comfortable with, and so on, then you can trust that Pluto knows what it's doing. It always, always, always knows what it's doing. It's the big evolutionary force, basically. And because it's so distant from us, and it's so distant from the consciousness and from the, what you can control, then we cannot govern what it's doing. It's like, I don't know, it sounds very metaphysical, but it really is such a force. You can call it God, you can call it Pluto, you can call it whatever you want. But there is like an ordering principle. And this ordering principle is saying, now is the time for this. And you want it or not, you're a small part of the big picture. And I mean, I don't know what you guys think. Tell me, do you prepare for, for something bad, or do you prepare to fight, or do you, I don't know what you are thinking, but it's going to be not an easy year, definitely. We have to be
it's really funny the way that how I said before, like I was really like, okay, relax, everything, and I hear you talking, I'm like, okay, get that. And like indeed, like it's so much bigger than I even expected it. I was enjoying the quiet, that it's something really bigger than that.
Well, yeah, the thing is, it's bigger, and maybe it's better to be warned, and to if we start focusing on the separate problems, we just won't get it. We won't get what's going on, I think. It's really very big, and there will be lots of small problems, like local problems, and there will be so many people that would start trying to solve these local small problems, and they would focus on them, and they would think, okay, if we get enough, let's say, for example, if we get enough ventilators, we're going to get over this, and it's going to solve it. Or if we change this in this law, it's going to solve it. It's not going to solve it. It's going to alleviate the process a little bit, every single step, but the whole thing is really a lot bigger than that. And does somebody wants to say something? Did I interrupt you? No?
I mean, I can only say what I've said right at the introduction. I mean, I concur completely. For me, this makes such perfect sense. Throughout history, we've gone through cycles, and it's as if we've sort of lulled ourselves into a belief that the status quo will, for the first time in human history, somehow prevail forever and after. But every time we've had monumental development, so you mentioned the Reformation, we've had the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. It's all precipitated by something fundamentally overturning the old order. And the old order, per definition, because it's so entrenched and per definition powerful, because it's the order, is obviously going to resist it.
Absolutely.
And the imagination, this is where I keep telling students and friends, this is a time for your imagination. So instead of getting caught up in the particular and the daily, use your imagination to see where this is potentially leading.
Exactly.
So we've all been talking about for the last, whatever, 1 or 2 years, across the globe, we're flying too much. We're driving too many cars. We're too busy, going to work and spending all our time there. And it's as if they're sort of ripping up the sheet and then saying, well, this is what you asked for and you didn't do anything about it. So let me help you along. And I'm just going to wipe out all the airlines and I'm going to destroy the car industry. So it's up to you to then see, do we want to cling to the old for a couple of years and then think that that somehow is going to rescue us, when in fact it's what's led up to, the finality? Or do we want to let go and then try and use our imagination to see, well, where is this supposed to take us? Let's look at the things that we've been arguing for, calling for, and then see, well, how do these replace what's been happening before, what's been the prevailing order beforehand?
Yeah, you're very right. This is exactly the point, Casper. And you say it so well. You say it a lot better than me, I think. And it's really the old order that's going to resist it a lot. That's one of the battles I think we're going to endure from now on. And there is another theory, much more positive. Like before I said, they are imposing things on us and they're using this as a, excuse for authoritarianism and things like that. But maybe another theory is that it really there needs to be such a global crisis for looking into the ecology, for example, looking into the responsibility of living in the earth without destroying it and things like that. That there needs to be a global crisis in order to make the mass of people to change their habits and to change their behavior. Otherwise, they're never going to do it willingly.
Exactly.
You're never gonna. I mean, no time in history has this ever happened. Make a crucial positive change in society without without something like that being imposed, because a lot of people are going to lose in the short term. Probably a lot of people will lose themselves, their lives in the process. But this was expected. I was reading books about this psychological and philosophical way of thinking of what's to come in the next years that were one-to-one exactly describing what's now happening. But when it's still not there, you're kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe not that serious. We don't remember wars. We don't remember real crisis. We haven't lived through it. I suspect this is going to be our one. And I don't know where it's going, but I suspect this is going to be the crisis of our generation. And we can't understand that the previous ones were not that far back as well. Many people don't realize this. And the wars were not that far back, weren't they? And
the way I try and illustrate it, depending on who I talk to. So when I talk to my CrossFit friends, so I'm obsessed with CrossFit, by the way. So then I explain to them, well, think about it as a preparation for a big tournament. You've got to go through hell, strenuous, hard work in order to, perform your best. So look at it that way. It's
Capricorn fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to my students, I say, well, it's like an exam and the subject that you're particularly weak on, but you needed to pass the overall, graduation.
By the way, Casper, sorry to interrupt you, but when you said an exam where you're particularly weak on, this is a very good way to explain in a couple of words, and thank you for that, of what's the meaning of Saturn in the birth chart. So you look at where your Saturn is, especially the house and the sign, and you answer this question: in which exam in life am I the weakest in? Basically, where is my greatest vulnerability when it comes to my capabilities? So where we have Saturn in the chart, say you have Saturn in the 7th house, then you have a certain complex, a certain, you're not very sure of yourself, you're not very confident in the area of relationships. You have a certain complex to overcome. But the good news is that it can be overcome. With Saturn, there is a way to solve it. There is a way to, ease up with it. But I mean, Pluto is a different thing. Pluto is just accepting things the way they are, and being willing to look at the very dark places of your own character and situation and everything. It's, yeah. I keep going back to Pluto, but Pluto is the key in this case. I think in this particular case that we're now having. Uh, can I tell you lastly, because I know it's now getting very long and I don't want to hold you anymore. There is one more player in this Capricornian group, and that's Jupiter. So even one more planet is now with Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn, and that's Jupiter. Jupiter is faster than Saturn. So Saturn takes 30 years around the zodiac, and Jupiter takes 12 years around the zodiac on average. But these two, Jupiter and Saturn, I think it's a good transition now to tell you about Jupiter, because we just spoke about Saturn. They are one of those pairs in astrology that are often talked about together as a contrast between things. The contrast, for example, between expansion and contraction. Jupiter is expansion, Saturn is contraction. About limitation and opportunity. Saturn is the limitation, Jupiter is the opportunity. And it's like the malefic and the benefic in traditional astrology. So there, Jupiter is there as well. So Jupiter breaks boundaries, expands, learns new things. It's very optimistic. It's a fiery energy in its philosophical way. It's actually looking like we have some piece of good news there among all the negatives. That's one way to look at it. We may think Jupiter is going to ease things up a little bit and be helpful, so that there are opportunities in this crisis as many as restrictions and troubles. And maybe that's going to be the case, at least for some people. Or maybe if you think of how sometimes twins divide among themselves the energies in their common birth chart, as twins have the same birth chart effectively. And sometimes one twin is acting on the moon more, the other one more on the sun. One is taking the Venus, the other one is taking the Mars. There is such a theory. So maybe thinking along these lines, we also have a choice there to maybe vote with Jupiter and not with Saturn, do something more Jupiterian, even though we're restricted. Jupiter is not just long distance travel and exploration in terms of going to different cultures physically and doing travel physically. It's also education and philosophy and knowledge and deep thinking, general thinking, basically kind of discussions as the one that we have now, and all sorts of things like this. So Jupiter is holding these potentials there. But there is another possibility that Jupiter in the mix is going to amplify the trouble even more, because another effect of Jupiter is making bigger everything that it touches. Yeah, so it's excessive. It could make the things excessive, too much, yeah, too big. And it's the one benefic among what, 3 malefics at the moment. So maybe it will act more as a one of those reasons why the situation is going to escalate even more. I think that it's going to get even more global, and the word global is connected with Jupiter in astrology. And so who knows, we can only guess. But I think that whenever you have so many different energies there, you can vote with one, kind of do something along the lines with, say, with Jupiter, and then you have an expression of the energy happened in your life. You have used the energy, and it hasn't used you. Maybe that's why I'm planning to do more writing, reading, and talking, and philosophizing and things like that now. In any case, we're going to be stuck at home, I guess. So this is one of the things we can do, or study something, or something like that. So yeah, I don't know what you think, but Jupiter is there. And finally, December this year, I think, so it's in the handout, but let me just remind myself which date. at the end of the year, 21st of December, both Saturn and Jupiter, the two society planets, in the past, they were the two that were showing what's going on in the world. Saturn and Jupiter are going out of Capricorn in December and will be making a conjunction together. So they will be coming together, these two, in 0 degrees Aquarius. So there is a lot about this that's important. First of all, we have this meeting between Jupiter and Saturn every 20 years. Last time it was in 2000, before 1980, 1960, 1940, 1920. And in all those previous times during the 20th century, and even further back in time, that these two planets came together, every time it was in an earth sign, either Taurus or Capricorn or Virgo. One of these was always where the conjunction happened between the two. But not this time around. This is the first time in many, many years that this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happens in an air sign, 0 degrees Aquarius. And that's not just anywhere, but it's 0 degrees is a very, very charged place in the zodiac. At the beginning of a sign or the end of a sign is it's like a magnet place. It's unusual, it's important for many reasons. I don't want to go into it, but it's not just in Aquarius, it's in 0 degrees Aquarius, which is supposed to again have this turning of the page effect. It's such a different energy. It's like Capricorn being pushed away, and we kind of say no more Capricorn. Aquarius is like a reaction to Capricorn with all its institutions and compression and depression and bureaucracy, all those topics. Just the opposite is what Aquarius is fighting for, and the rebelliousness and free spirit and individualism and many other things. Some of you know about it. So it's a shift of energy, big time. So I think if we survive by the end of this year, later on in 2021, I think it will be a completely different atmosphere, because Saturn and Jupiter are the status quo of the short-term historical moment, if that makes sense. So Saturn and Jupiter are about what will happen in our generation or in this decade, the theme of the decade. In this case, every conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, these ones that happen every 20 years, they set the trend for the next 20 years. So that means that now in 2020, we are at the end of their cycle, right at the end. Like Saturn and Pluto made a conjunction in January this year, in the same way, in December, Jupiter and Saturn will make a conjunction, but now in Aquarius. So, and this is going to, whatever they set as a trend, will be the topic of the next 20 years in politics, in society. Yeah. So it's all starting from the end of this year, and the effects will be seen just afterwards in a different fashion than what's going on this year. It almost feels like, to me, it feels like there will be a newness this year. We will be, if we imagine that the whole earth is like an organism and we are part of it, and we are ill now, literally and not literally, that we're going to heal by the end of the year, and then we're not going to be the same again, and we'll start something different next year. Does it make sense to you, what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like pregnancy, you're saying. Yeah. It's I found a similar comparison somewhere, that it's really like pregnancy. One of the things that Pluto is connected to as an idea is the sowing of seeds. Again, this is very philosophical, but that whatever Pluto is doing, in other words, is sowing the seeds of tomorrow, of whatever is to come tomorrow, which is like a big new trend, a new process. So yeah, in this sense, you're right. It's like a pregnancy, but where you really are suffering and isolating, and then going through very painful labor, which is a very good description of Saturn combining with Pluto. It always feels like labor pain, these sort of transits. And yeah, it's I think you get the picture. Do you have any questions for me before we finish?
I was just going to say, to kind of like summarize everything you've been talking about today,
Go
because
ahead.
we're dealing with such powerful planets, it seems like the best things for us to do are to kind of play to their rules right now, which seems to be surrendering to Pluto, just surrendering what's happening, and
Yeah.
that we're kind of right now. And then discipline for Saturn,
Yeah.
and just moving forward and like working hard and kind of pleasing Saturn in that way.
Exactly. Makes sense. That's sounds like a sensible strategy. And all of those planets, the way you said it, the difficulty I think is that they want us to not be emotional too much for a while, and it's so hard not to be emotional in what's going on. But Saturn only works when we manage to overcome the emotion and to be more reasonable, because Saturn is reason. It's one of the reasons why someone that has a lot in the chart, for example, is very often blamed of being not emotional enough, too restrained, too closed off, too not showing vulnerability. But that's the kind of energy Saturn and Capricorn is, and it's going to dominate the whole atmosphere throughout the whole year. And I think we just need to stay put, as they're advising us. Maybe it's not going to be that bad at the end of the day. And I think trying to resist this is not going to solve anything. It's not going to. It looks like it's so unavoidable that what can I do? Can I go out in the park if I'm going to be stopped by the police? It's just yeah. But my hope is in this conjunction of Pluto and the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at the end of the year in Aquarius. That's what's giving me the most hope, is because that gives me like a time frame of until when I should be quiet and stay put and concentrate on my own work and my own personal priorities, and just trying to be calm and so on. Until when? So I've kind of thought to myself, I'll give myself until the end of the year to not be too pushy, but then depending on what happens by then and what sort of measures they impose on us and what's going on, then I would see whether there's a need to be rebellious about something or not. As Aquarius is going to bring this rebellious energy, and I would like to finish with prediction, maybe just a random prediction that I think we are going to see some very interesting stories by the end of the year in the media about exposure of people in power and institutions in power in an unprecedented way, where we would be able to, I mean, all people, the whole society in all countries will be able to see evidence of what was going on behind the scenes for many, many years before, and the whole dirt of the elite and the, all sorts of practices of abuse of power that we can imagine. And it's going to be big, it's going to be interesting. And that's going to, I think, activate the Aquarian energy at the end of the year and afterwards, of people having seen all those things being exposed during the Capricorn period. It will be unbearable. It will be like, there is no way we can tolerate this anymore kind of reaction. So that's where I believe. Maybe Donna, you would help me with reminding me, when is the election in the United States?
The election is
November.
I think it's November, but I think
Oh
the
my gosh.
3rd, maybe the 6th, very
Right.
early in first week.
Right in the middle of Mars retrograde in Aries.
Oh no.
Which squares all the other planets in Capricorn. So that's if there is a peak moment of this year, that's it. I mean,
Well, it's already ugly.
Maybe even somebody won't survive. I hear comments about No, from other astrologers. I don't like these predictions about politics and stuff like that. You really cannot predict, as we saw, that everybody knew something was going to happen this year, but nobody could say what. So that's the way it works. But I mean, some are saying that somebody may die. By the way, it will be very interesting for you. This final thing, I promise this will be the last thing I say. It's about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. That's the one coming up in December, and the one that's every 20 years. So there is a statistic. The statistic shows that every single president of the United States that came into office during a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction year died during the time in office. Yeah, didn't finish the term because he died during the term of office. One of them is Kennedy. I don't remember the other two, but all the presidents that came into power during this conjunction in the relevant years, and you can check that out if you're interested.
Well, are you talking about the 20-year, the zero?
Yeah,
we call it the zero factor, but Reagan didn't die.
No,
No.
It's not about the zero. It's about sometimes it doesn't happen on
Okay.
the year. Sometimes it happens on the 1 year or the one before. It's a little bit
Okay.
because they go retrograde as well, these planets. So it's roughly 20 years, but it's roughly the beginnings of the decades, the first years of the decades or something like that. So I know that for sure because it's been discussed many times.
Yeah, it was called the zero factor for a long time, but then Reagan and 1980 and 2000, it didn't happen. But it did for Kennedy, and it happened for all the other presidents who were elected in a year that ended, which is only every 20 years that it happens. That it ends.
No.
I have to correct you here. It's not about when they won the election. It's about actually have been in office during that year. It's a different. It's a bit confusing.
Yeah.
We can check that out.
No, I'm just telling that there was this thing they called the zero factor, and we waited. But two of those two guys, I wasn't really crazy about them, but they didn't die.
I don't know. Well,
I don't think the person who come up with that theory knew anything about astrology.
No, but there is obviously something to do with it. Well, Jupiter and Saturn are the symbols in astrology for political power. No other planets are related to political power as much as these two, Jupiter and Saturn. These are the two sides of societal structure. One is the rules and the regulations. The other one is for example, Jupiter is the law, the education system, while Saturn is the government. They work together as principles. Jupiter psychologically is what are the things your Jupiter shows you? What are the things that you would be willing to get involved into in life, in society, in the status quo society, the way you join it because you were born in that time, in this country, in whatever, all those external things around you, in the background of your life, basically. What you willingly choose to put your attention to, what to work, what to study, what to believe in, and so on. But Saturn is what is imposed on you by that same structure that you cannot escape. You cannot escape that. You have to be called something. Maya, Anna, these are the names we carry are Saturnian things. Yeah, the fact that we have to carry a name and to present ourselves in front of society with that name and to this is me now. This is a Saturnian institution of a sort, if you think about it. Or paying bills or paying taxes, and this is the way we take. That's why it's very likely, I'm trying to say, that if something as a pattern happens in politics, and this coincides with the pattern of relationship between Jupiter and Saturn, exactly, no others but these two, then we have a lot of reason to suspect that the two are related. So that's where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hopefully this will lead to a lack of corruption,
A lack, I
a
suspect,
lack, like a lesser amount. I mean,
a lesser amount.
we have so much.
Again, this is really not going to be the final word, but Capricorn is the symbol of power which has reached its peak. The maximum power, the maximum structure, the maximum, like Roman Empire at its final days. Imagine, or it's actually now is a similar situation. And Capricorn is the symbol in astrology of collective things having reached such a big peak that they cannot be collective anymore, they cannot be stable anymore, and they have to be overthrown by the individual factor. So now is the turn of the individual factor, which is Aquarius, the one after Capricorn. Aquarius is the one that now wants to give a chance, little by little, not immediately, to every single person to have a say, every single person to, but that's going to take time. Basically, Capricorn is showing us why and what and where we're going. But eventually, when Aquarius starts a new cycle, say Aquarius is the first point of individualism, say, for example, while Capricorn was the last point of collective. Then the wheel is going to turn again. In many years, we are not going to be alive, but in many years, whatever is starting today as a new, let's say, new world order, whatever it is, it's again going to reach its final mature point, and there will be something that will come and overthrow it. It's repeating itself. It's cyclic, isn't it? It's just that we can see that where we are now. We can see at what turning point we are now, and it's a pretty big one from many different places, from many different sides. Guys, any questions before we give it call it a day? I think some of you are no longer here anyway, but yeah, you're very quiet.
We are overwhelmed.
This was meant to be a reassuring call. Well, it turned out to be an even more depressive one, I think.
No, I disagree. I think exactly the opposite. I think it's hugely reassuring.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to cleanse. Everybody knows it. It's in the air. It's palpable. I mean, it used to be some sort of quixotic thing. I used to run around and say that 2008 led up to this, and now everybody is saying it. I mean, you can almost not find a social media post that doesn't talk about, new world, new era, raising of consciousness, doing away with, things that clearly haven't worked and so on. And I think it's just so good to have it in perspective. And then clearly, 9 months and we're into something exciting and new.
Yeah. The bad news is that this is not going to happen straight away. That's the thing. Because
Sure.
if we came to the conclusion that Pluto is the big force behind the gravity of it all, then this Pluto is acting so slowly, it's such a slow process that it's just starting. And I've always thought, ever since I study astrology, that I've understood, for me, that I'm going to be part of the lost generation, of the generation that's neither going to be able to live in the world as it was before, as it doesn't exist anymore and won't exist anymore, but will not be able to live in the new one either, because it's still not happened. So all we can do is, I think, in a Pluto, the Pluto advice here, coming from a Plutonian, which I consider myself to be, with Pluto the most important planet in my chart, is to just do your own, stick to your own business, kind of thing. In a way, not selfishly, but in a way, think how you can contribute to life in a minimal way. But it doesn't have to be something dramatic and big and but just doing what you're best in, doing what you can do, and dedicating. Actually, Pluto wants to make us dedicate to something that is bigger than us, like a mission kind of thing, or over selfish goals, you know.
Think of our grandparents who, you know, endured some of them 2 world wars, but certainly, you know, the second one. They knew that coming out on the other side would be almost as hard as what they went through. But you're doing it as a sacrifice, as a necessary thing for the sake of generations to follow.
Yes.
It's a bit like being a parent, you know, it's not all that dissimilar.
Yeah.
You're taking these sacrifices for the sake of the offspring and creating a world for them to grow into.
And also being an example of how to, and the big reason, for example, why I study this, why I study astrology, is to find out, to narrow down a bit more what I'm meant to do, what I'm supposed to do, to start designating that from what everybody else is supposed to do, because it's a completely different thing. It's a completely different path we all have, and to kind of do small bits and pieces of steps in the process. But Casper, you were talking about the war in the 20th century, the wars. Maybe it will be interesting for you to know that Pluto was discovered in 1930. Don't need to explain anything about that. And it was on its, so this is a bit more technical, but never mind. When Pluto was discovered, it was located in the sky on its own north node in Cancer. So basically, you don't have to understand this, but I'm telling you that because Cancer is opposite Capricorn. And whatever, it's like the journey between a new moon to the full moon, or between the full moon and the new moon, is the kind of journey between Cancer and Capricorn. Cancer is the ultimate symbol of the home, of the privacy, of the personal space, of family, of where we are concentrating. And the lesson they had to learn is self-preservation in the family, for the family, after the wars, so that they can travel towards, in the next years, towards living a more and more and more collective life. Yeah. So now we are starting an opposite journey. We've had too much of a collective life that doesn't work. And we have to start, I think, thinking about what are the lessons, individual lessons. What is the big crisis? Like, we are all going to react very negatively to what's going on now. Every single one of us is going to lose the nerve, is going to lose patience, is going to lose temper. And we are going to see exposed in front of our faces the hardest and ugliest part of our own character. You know, we are going to expose ourselves in this situation because we're going to be provoked to do that. Everyone is going to do it in one way or another. And I think this is going to be the hard journey after the crisis, is how to reconcile this, how to, kind of make peace with yourself and start again and do something positive, even though you've seen that maybe you're not so strong, that you're not so positive all the time. And yeah, and does it make sense to you what I'm saying? This culture.
100%, absolutely.
Yeah, happy to hear. Hear. Well, I thank you so much for attending today for so long. I hope it was interesting and not too philosophical for your taste. I just tend to be like this, and I don't see any other way to think of astrology apart from trying to make sense of the whole picture through it. You know, seeing how the dots connect. Because as this the first quote that I read you in the beginning, I really believe that if we have explanation and sense of perspective, it's easier to go through it and to hold on. You wishing to say anything at the end? Oh, thank you, Casper. I had no chance to look at the comments, by the way, for which I apologize. I'm just a bit stressed out of this unusual setting. For me, this is very unusual. But as we were progressing, I was feeling more and more relaxed with you like that. Yeah. Yes, I'm not good online. I'm just I like you to
It
be
was fine.
with me here with
Doing great.
Keep doing it.
You did, did a great job. Yeah.
starting from somewhere. Starting from somewhere. Yeah, if you want, I'm gonna be happy to do it again at some point for something else.
Yes, please.
If you have any
Yeah.
questions, please also use the page if you want to. I mean, it's totally inactive, this page on Facebook, my page, Astrology. You can ask questions there and I will respond. I mean, you can ask general questions, whatever. And I'm just trying to develop those social media stuff while having so much free time now. And yeah, let's get it going. I'm going to have time to answer questions and do things like this more than before. So feel free to reach out if you want to.
Cool.
Okay. Well, have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good to
Bye.
Okay.
Oh,
Ciao.
bye-bye.
Bye.